Welcome to North Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, and occasionally completely wrong, Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's been odd being as jet lagged as I have been. I don't know if I've ever actually been this jet lagged. And so I think I finally reached the point of no longer looking at my phone to see like the time zone of the person I'm texting, especially when they're in the same time zone as me. But that is an underrated aspect of the whole that's an underrated aspect of the whole jet lagged thing. Like, because if you go from Eastern to Mountain, like if you finally get used to Eastern and then go to Mountain, it's all gone. And by the time you make it to Central, nothing makes sense. Black is white. You just want to land and sleep, and that is what I should have done this weekend, and I did not. So it's been interesting, but wanted to welcome everyone to the show. We have plenty to discuss. We have a Saints game to review, a couple odds and ends that we want to talk about before we hit the mailbag. We also have a ton of NFC North news as far as comings and goings. Lots of draft picks coming into the region, and established players seem to be leaving. We like that, I suppose. And then we have the mailbag as well. So before we begin, again, want to thank you guys so much. We could not have done the 2 New York shows without you guys. Again, we really do appreciate it. We are talking about next year. I still think we should go to Denver regardless of whether or not we're playing in Denver, but it was a hell of a trip, and I want to thank you guys a lot. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of 2 different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or, as it was told to me repeatedly in the car by a listener of the show, do you say Patriots or Patriots? So here's your shout out, DJ.
Wow. All right.
Yes. Patreon.com/NorseCode. You can donate there. That is a subscription-based platform. You can do $1 a month, $3.50 a month to help keep Loch Ness Monster at bay. We had plenty of Norse Code Nessie stuff posted on Facebook and on Twitter over the past week, 2 weeks now. So Norse Code Nessie was in full effect for the New York game. So that was a hell of a lot of fun. But if you would like to donate, you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode or to Patriots. Patreon.com/NorseCode. I will break myself of this eventually. But that being said, we actually haven't had a chance to really talk since the trip. So before we get into the Saints game, I wanted to ask your best and worst of the trip, of the trip to New York and of the experience.
Yeah, I would say the worst was the car ride back from the stadium. That's like kind of unequivocal. There's nothing comparable.
I do like the idea that you were navigating, she was driving, and I was trying to keep everyone in the car from killing each other.
Yeah, which, I mean, how often are you put in that role? Not specifically with the other people like navigating and driving, but like James Pagashnik, peacemaker.
More often than you'd think. There are a lot of children in my household.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. It does not seem intuitively wise. But yeah, you performed your job admirably insofar as we didn't. So congrats.
Yep, no one died. I still wonder if she got home. Like, part of me wants to
She's just like wandering the streets of Manhattan.
Yep, just days later. I don't understand what just happened. I just wanted to get back on the George Washington Bridge. I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, everything would have been easier if she listened to the directions that the app gave her. Like, this isn't even about me, right? Because I was like, well, here are some other directions that are not from the app that you're using. But yeah, that's how it was for 3 hours. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Great. Cool. The best part, I don't know, man, maybe New York style pizza. Like, I feel like the pizza that we had was just incredible. I mean, the pizza that you and I had at Patsy's was great. The pizza I had at Danny's House of Pizza, also phenomenal. I still remember it, so I might pick that. Also, it was nice that the Vikings won.
Well, there's that too, but the it is funny because I remember distinctly the pizza from Patsy's and just the way it made you feel afterwards. And it was so delicious. And the thing that was kind of odd after the fact is that I've had pizza since, and it's just not lived up at all since then. It's like I had to make some cardboard like pizza earlier today, actually, because it was what I had in the house. I was like, okay, well, I'll just make this. And you might as well have had like a violinist doing the saddest solo. It was like, this is not comparable to what I had a week ago. It was tragic. Best and worst for me, the best pizza was obviously Patsy's. And the Norse Code shows and meeting so many people at the tailgate was really awesome. And to a person, there's this interesting stereotype of like the busy New Yorker and whatever, like the discord. I say disgruntled, but kind of the mean New Yorker thing. But to a person, we got so many compliments on the show, but just b, the fact that they loved hearing, I guess, local Vikings news, which they don't get in New York, obviously. So, like, the way that it kind of related to people and how much they enjoyed the whole Minnesota bloggers and podcasters take Manhattan thing. So that was really cool. The worst for me actually was not the drive back from MetLife.
Good Lord.
The worst for me actually was the flight from Detroit to Lansing, because I was meeting a buddy in Lansing shortly after the show, shortly after the New York portion of the trip. And when I made it to Lansing, I wanted to kiss the ground because the flight was so terrible. And when you're on a flight and the airplane makes a bunch of weird noises, you look toward the stewardess, you look toward the flight attendant, right? Like, if the plane is small and making weird noises and almost appears to have, like, feels like it had stopped, you look over at them and be like, so what are you doing? And what you don't want to see is the stewardess run down the aisle, or the flight attendant, sorry, run down the aisle, strap into their seat, and do a sign of the cross.
Oh boy.
So... yeah, my only thought at that point was, well, I've always wanted to die in Michigan. So there's that. And also, oddly enough, Michigan, not to get off on like a tangent, but Michigan really does feel like if you went to like Duluth or Bemidji and left it alone for 3 years and then came back. Like the state of like the roads, the state of like the road construction and everything really did have this. You would have enjoyed it as a fan of like dystopian novels, because it felt off. There was something off about the whole like area there. That said, downtown Detroit, which I did see quite a bit, was quite lovely. The concerts I caught were quite great. But Detroit really did feel like you just leave things alone for 3 years and come back as like a science project.
That's pretty astounding. It feels like there's like some sort of like secondary mystery that, you know, if you had stayed, you would have had to like resolve, right?
It's entirely possible. Well, that's the thing, is that like Dearborn has an absurd number of Middle Eastern residents for reasons that make sense only to the residents of Dearborn. When I went to Dearborn and like got into my hotel before I went to the airport in the morning, I was able to get chicken shawarma pizza, and I was like, I don't understand this at all, right, but like I'm just gonna go with it. So.
Well, also, like, Dearborn's like Middle East population has heavily influenced the development of Detroit-style pizza, which is like a thing. I think it's like part Sicilian inspired too, because it's like a square pizza in a pan with like a crispy crust and stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah, I hear good things about the pizza that has like created. This is a pizza show now.
It is. All of a sudden, like, all it took was a trip to New York, and we're both like experts. And you know, the chicken shawarma pizza, if you do get it from whatever the name of the place was that probably stole my credit card information. You get the pickles on the chicken shawarma pizza. For some reason, that really did add an extra little bit of tang on that. I don't like pickles on my pizza, but that was something.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. Down from Ohio must be having like a heart attack right now listening to this.
Like, it's odd when we have shows just specifically for like one or two listeners. It used to happen all the time in the coffee days. So, so let's talk about the main topic for the show, which is going to be the Saints game. The Vikings did lose the game. They were in it for some time, and then a Thielen fumble really flip the switch on that. And I guess the first question I have for you is, why is it that whenever it rains, it pours as far as like things coming apart from Minnesota? We really do have a history of, well, there's a turnover, so there's going to be 6 points out of this. Or Thielen fumbling, okay. Then the defense just decides that they can't tackle anyone shortly after that. So why is it that when it rains, it pours in Minnesota?
I mean, I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, it's just
this is what you are paid for. This is why people go onto The Athletic. This is why. Why does everything horrible happen to us when Drew Brees is involved, except for the one time?
the one time in week one, but only one of the week ones, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if like. That, I mean, if that is the case, if that just seems to be the case, it certainly feels like it's true, right? That like, a thing has gone wrong. Well, time to pack up.
Oh, we're going to lose the kick, or we're going to miss the kick. I bet that's not going to haunt us.
Right? Yeah, it like totally impacted the entirety of second half strategy, like this missed extra point. Yeah. So that's super cool. Yeah, it's interesting because I think that so the two turnovers. So the two turnovers that I distinctly remember, the Thielen fumble and the pick six that was targeted to Diggs. Those combined have, according to the expected point metrics that Pro Football Reference has put together, had an impact of 17 points in terms of the swing, right? Because it takes points away from what the Vikings were expected to score on those respective drives, and adds points, obviously, to the Saints. Obviously, the pick six, it immediately adds 7 expected points. And so the Vikings, on average, in that position, were about to score, 1 point, right, based on the average offense. And it's a little bit different, right, because they didn't score directly off of the Thielen fumble. But the Vikings were in a better position to score, and so they had more potential points to lose, and they gave up a good number of potential points, and so they both ended up being about 8.5 points in terms of the swing. Yeah, so obviously when a team loses by 10 and you can pinpoint 2 plays that cost 17 points, it seems like that's the story of the game, and it is the story of why the Vikings kind of lost that game. But it's not necessarily the story of how the Vikings did in that game, if that makes sense. And it's something that Zimmer kind of wanted to emphasize both immediately after the game and on Monday, that the Vikings overall played pretty well on like 98% of plays or something like that. There was 120 plays run, and out of like 118 plays, they seemed to do pretty well. But that should be kept in mind, right? That the Vikings went up against one of the best teams in the NFC. And for the most part, outside of what I would characterize as uncharacteristic, except insofar as they are soul crushing, uncharacteristic problems, they came out looking like the better team. And I use the phrase looking like the better team because it's like just generic enough for you to be able to kind of fit in your own meaning there. It's like vague. But I think you get my point, right? That the Vikings probably outplayed the Saints for most of the snaps. But it's the smaller instances of big plays that tend to define games.
Well, I mean, the Vikings are the kings of just the consolation prize, or the moral victory. So I think we can take solace in the fact that while we may have lost by a margin, we did force Drew Brees to pass for a near career low, if I remember correctly. Like, we can take a few positives away from it, despite the fact that we got beat badly.
Right. Yeah. It's something like his lowest since like late 2014, early 2015, and before that, like he hadn't had one that low. It's like 2009 or something. It's just like it's obviously it's very unusual for him, right? So yeah, you could take solace in that. I don't know if I'd call it a moral victory just because of like how bad it feels afterwards, because it's not like these scrappy underdogs got within like 2 points, right? But yeah, it's a game that kind of demonstrates that when the Vikings are on, they can compete with the best, and when they're not on, things happen, and we don't need to talk about them.
Well, we will sadly end up having to talk about a couple of things anyway, but the hot take out of this game was that Kirk Cousins is a $84 million loser, 87.
Right? Yeah.
So that was the hot take. I read the article. I obviously disagree with it, but that it is odd that people pin all of these problems on the ability of Kirk Cousins, and I'm not sure that I'd read a tweet earlier today that was something along the lines of, "Would you believe that both teams that played in the NFC Championship game last year upgraded at quarterback and both may miss the playoffs this year?" It's like,
yeah, that is pretty wild.
Yeah. So the blame has been thrown at the feet of Kirk Cousins. Is this accurate? Not necessarily that he's a gigantic $87 million bust, but do you feel that the blame should be placed on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins?
Yeah. So, I mean, I read that article. It's I will link it in the show notes. If it's something you feel like doesn't deserve to be clicked, don't click it. But it's from Mike Freeman, Bleacher Report. I assume that's the one you're talking about how Kirk Cousins has like proven that he's like an $84 million bust or whatever. And I think that's not the case for a couple of reasons. So I'm not a Kirk Cousins like defender. I've been pretty critical of him. Obviously, work in progress was coined like I think week 1 where people have been throwing that back at me. But yeah, he obviously has performed really, really well in certain situations. I think the problem with putting an article out like this, aside from the fact that it's like obviously like wrong, is that it swings too hard in one direction, and it makes it difficult for us to like engage in what I think is really valid criticism of Cousins, that it doesn't have to revolve around how much money he makes. Like, yeah, it's going to be useful kind of down the road to evaluate the decision-making process that goes into putting this much money together for a quarterback and whether or not it was worth it, right? And so you can have an ongoing conversation, just like we had an ongoing conversation about how Sam Bradford might have actually been worth that first-round pick, even if it didn't seem like that at the time. So I'm fine having kind of this ongoing discussion, but like constantly having it about the $84 million instead of a question of like, so he's a quarterback of a team, and what does he add? What does he not add? Can he help the team? Can he not? It gets kind of annoying, and it becomes very difficult for us to discuss Cousins' flaws as a quarterback that I think really distinguish him from, say, kind of the upper tier quarterbacks. And so in a conversation with Luke Braun yesterday, who I believe does climbing the pocket stuff, but he's on Vikings Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. I was talking to him, and he put together a thread, and I didn't realize he was putting together a thread. I just responded to the first tweet. And my response to him was it's really about framing. Kirk Cousins is not the problem. He's just not the solution. And so your expectations going in of what that means for you kind of defines whether or not you think he's worth $84 million over 3 years. We keep saying $84 million, and it's a contextless number. It's a 3-year contract, and at $27 million, Cousins, $28 million. Cousins, I think, he's putting together a season that you'd expect an upper tier, but not necessarily elite quarterback, which is kind of what his contract implies, is having. He's doing a really, really great job in kind of the vast majority of situations. The issue for him is that he lacks, I think, situational flexibility. And so he needs to be kind of better in areas where he's not flexible in order to overcome that. And he's really good in areas where he doesn't need to be flexible. I was talking to someone else about this, and I think depending on the specific trait you're kind of defining, that could be up to 85% of his game, or 90 or 65% of his game. Sorry, not 90, where he can just play according to plan. And the specific trait that you're talking about, whether or not it's when a play breaks down or when he needs to like step up in the pocket or have pocket awareness, or if it's, when the post snap doesn't look like the pre snap, or when it comes to changing his arm angle, his arm slot, which, could be characterized as one of the issues that might lead to all those batted passes, or, any number of other things when he doesn't get to set his feet. In those situations, it kind of breaks down. So, and that's what prevents him from becoming kind of an elite quarterback, is that when things go awry and he has to do something that's not, classic quarterbacking technique, because he's really good at that. He's got a great arm. He steps up into his throws. He is really accurate. He does a phenomenal job in pre-snap processing. He does a great job going through his progressions really quickly. When it's not, quarterback technique in a very classical sense, then he struggles. And that's a really important thing to talk about when talking about, the ways the Vikings can make him comfortable, uncomfortable, kind of what his limitations are as a quarterback, maybe why. As a quarterback, I think he still, has a losing record or whatever. And if you're a guy who cares about quarterback wins, which, I'm not, and you wanted to discuss kind of what the disparity is between what looks to be a pretty good quarterback and what seems to be a pretty poor quarterback record, maybe you could point to that. But I think that overall, Cousins is worth the money that the Vikings gave him. He just has flaws that need to be worked around. And articles like this, which I think Freeman gets a lot more flack than he should, just kind of in general. I think that he writes some really good stuff that doesn't tend to get highlighted as much as the bad stuff. But articles like this, I think, serve to undermine our ability to have these critical discussions that require, maybe a little bit of nuance. Because, he's not a perfect quarterback. I would not say, kind of regardless of what his adjusted net yards per attempt is right now. I don't know what it is. I can't imagine it's in the top 5. But if it is in the top 5, I would say, well, he's still not a top 5 quarterback because he doesn't have those specific traits. So we saw a lot of that. In this Saints game, he performed really well. Maybe it kind of depends on how you interpret that pick 6. But, you overall did really well. But then, you get into situations where the offense needs to execute at a different pace than it's used to executing. Well, then he's kind of struggling there. Or you get into a situation where the pocket's breaking down a little bit more. He was under pressure 49% of snaps. Well, his accuracy was really high in that situation, and his PFF grade is super high in that situation. But he didn't create kind of in the same way that Case Keenum did. And maybe that's asking too much, but when you're comparing him against elite quarterbacks, that's kind of what you're looking for. So, yeah, I think that you could say he overall did well, but he also did not give the Vikings the tools to overcome the problems that were created by others, which you really want a quarterback to be able to do because they have the biggest impact on the game.
Yeah, and especially the fumble that happened that the Vikings ended up. It turned out that he was down. It really seemed like that was more of a situation that he was putting us into as opposed to helping us get out of.
Right. Yeah. It was another situation where you had to kind of be worried about the fumbling issue, and you could bring it up again and talk about his fumbles. In this case, he was like very down, like it wasn't particularly close, and it probably should not have been called a fumble on the field. But yeah, it's easier to like talk about it just because it's like, well, he fumbles the ball a lot, and here's a situation where it looks like he fumbled. So yeah, that is. He does put himself sometimes in situations where he's creating the problem. But I think on balance, he's not the overall capital P problem for the Vikings, but he's definitely not the solution to those problems. And you really want your high-level quarterbacks to be that. The Eagles think that Carson Wentz is. It appears right now that he's not. But, MVP last year, it appears that he could be. Tom Brady obviously is. Drew Brees obviously is. He overcame so many bad defenses in New Orleans. Maybe Matt Ryan isn't. Maybe he is, but I think he's closer to it. So that's kind of the discussion that's kind of worth having.
Joe Flacco used to be kind of. There was an argument about it anyway.
He he was elite, but he never had any elite qualities. Let's say that.
Is that like having the membership but never like going to any meetings? He just like.
Yeah, it's like having Joe Flacco as your quarterback is like having a gym membership.
I was gonna compare it to being the janitor for like the Super Friends, but okay, I mean that works too. I'm a super friend. I do important work here. Well, while we're talking about Kirk Cousins and the interception was mentioned, let's talk about that. Who shoulders the blame on that? Was it Diggs for appearing to stop in the middle of a route, or was this a ball placement issue?
I think that the blame question is a little. This sounds like a cop out. I mean, it's like not that useful. The how question is useful, so I don't want to like elicit any conversation about kind of how it happened to be. But blame, I think, is kind of weird in this situation because I don't think it's necessarily anyone's fault. And thankfully, somebody kind of experienced in quarterbacking responded where Dan Orlovsky kind of responded to my tweet about, here's what Diggs's logic might have been in stopping. And Dan Orlovsky said, we just called those plays BBB, which is not Big Baller Brand, but bad break, bro. Is what he said, where both players did something that they thought made sense at the time. And it was totally understandable that what they did. So I see a lot of people that are saying, Diggs, you're in man coverage. If you're in man coverage on a drag route, you don't stop. And that's true in a situation where the play is not breaking down. But in a situation, and that's not 100% of the time true either. That's kind of important. When you're in a drag route and you're in man coverage, you're almost never you're almost always trailed, right? And the cornerback on top of you or the defender on top of you is never in front of you at the same time. Or not never, but almost never. And so, you sit in zones on drag routes. They're often called sit routes or stop routes by various offensive coordinators, where you just sit and stop on a drag route if you feel like you've got kind of a leverage advantage. And that typically only happens in zones. It doesn't happen in man as often. But very often in a situation where you do have a defender ahead and on top, you'll throw the ball behind the receiver. And that's what Diggs anticipated, right? And so he thought the ball was going to go behind him, and he would have a pretty tremendous opportunity for a lot of yards after the catch. And Cousins thought he was going to continue the route. And this is kind of where it gets tricky. What counts as a broken play? If that's not a broken play, then he should be following man coverage rules. But wait, man coverage rules only really apply 95% of the time. And so intuitively, maybe it doesn't make sense here. And I don't think it's anyone's fault. And what's really interesting is that I saw some people say, Arif says that this is Kirk Cousins' fault. And that's not what I meant to imply by the tweet that answered someone else's question, why would Diggs do that? And I just explained, this is probably what Diggs was thinking. And some people took that to mean, Kirk Cousins was wrong, according to Arif. Or, Arif's got it out for Kirk Cousins. He thinks that Diggs was right and Cousins was wrong. And it's just a conversation about how you want to run your offense and what you do in those situations. And they had a miscommunication between the two of them. So Diggs thought the ball was going to get thrown behind him, which is a logical place to put the ball. And then he would get a bunch of yards after the catch. Cousins thought Diggs would keep running, which is a logical thing to think about a receiver on a drag route. And he didn't. So pick six. That sucks. Zimmer saying that, and Matthew Collar made a good point about this. Zimmer saying that he didn't want his players to talk about whose fault it was, to take blame for it, because you win as a team, you lose as a team. I get Zimmer's argument, but I think Collar's point about how the media is going to try and describe what happened. It's primarily their job, and if they don't get clarity from players, which often comes in the form of "that's my fault, that's his fault," then it's very difficult for the media to provide the kind of clarity that teams want from them. Like, they hate it when teams mischaracterize things, and then they don't provide, media with enough information to properly characterize things. And so I agree with Matthew Collar's point. I'm not saying that we should stop assigning blame on plays. I'm saying that this particular play is a situation where it is probably just a bad break.
So if we move past Diggs for a moment, Adam Thielen had another great game despite the fumble that he had. And I actually want to bring this up because this was brought up in a mailbag question by Raul, who said, does Thielen have a fumble problem? In his career, 254 receptions. I love how there's real stat diving on this. In his career, 254 receptions, 8 rushes, 3 kick returns, and 6 punt returns. He has 6 fumbles and 4 lost. That is a fumble every 45 touches. In contrast, Adrian Peterson fumbles every 67 touches. I suppose the difference being that when Adrian would fumble, it would be in bunches.
Right, it would be in bunches and at seemingly critical moments, and then also there were 2 years where Adrian Peterson, it felt like he'd solved his fumble problem, right? No, it was really good to actually provide the context for Adrian Peterson. But then I thought, what if wide receivers fumble more, right? Because quarterbacks definitely fumble more in terms of per contact. If you just add their sacks and runs, the top in fumble rate is always it's the top 15, 14 of them are quarterbacks, or maybe all 15. So I looked into this and I was looking at, who has fumbled the most often. So I put together all of the touches that everybody's had, and I divided by their fumbles, and I decided, 1 year is not enough because fumbles are a low frequency event. So I looked over the past 3 years, which conveniently also captures the amount of time that Thielen has been starting. And so I looked at that, and receivers generally do fumble more, and that's important. I also needed to make sure that I added, kick returns and punt returns, because you're just much more likely to fumble on a punt return. And if I'm adding punt returns, why wouldn't I add kick returns? And so I looked at all of that, and I haven't. So I got this question. I immediately looked it up, and then I kind of got distracted afterwards. So I didn't do the second step of isolating if the fumbles that only occur on punt returns are kind of polluting the data. Because, again, the more you return punts, the more likely you are to just fumble, because it's very easy to fumble on punt returns, which is another reason that Marcus Sherrills is dope. Because, he's done it twice, maybe, I think, in his career, and he's been the primary punt returner for so long. I think not having accounted for the punt return fumbles, so that's a caveat to the data, there is a good indication that Thielen might actually have a fumble problem. And so I said earlier, uncharacteristic problems. In the presser after the game, someone asked, hey, this isn't characteristic of Thielen, kind of going forward, do you have, confidence that the mistakes were uncharacteristic, but the big plays, the positive plays were characteristic? And to the premise of that, of course, is that, Thielen's not likely to fumble the ball. And the evidence suggests that he does have a fumble problem. I'm not going to say that he absolutely does, right? Because I have no idea. I haven't, again, taken that second step of separating out the punt stuff. But he ranked 8th or 9th of the 130 or so skill players that I looked at in terms of fumble rate. What was it? I forget what stat we received, but because I looked at a different data set, I saw 1 every 45, which is way better than the 1 out of every 25 that I saw for one player, that's pretty bad. I think 2 players had 1 fumble for every 25 and 26 touches. So it's pretty awful. But he had 1 every 45 or 46 or something like that, and that's really high. And so that's kind of worth thinking about and investigating. And trying to figure out sort of kind of what causes that, because if it is just the punts, not an issue. The thing is, I don't actually remember that many Thielen fumbles. And I remember Adrian Peterson fumbles, right? I don't have a good answer for you, so I'd put a pin in it. But I did try to take the data a step further and see if it was being interfered with or confounded by the fact that he's a receiver and Adrian Peterson's a running back, and that receivers tend to fumble the ball a lot more. Also, we're going to see more receiver fumbles this year because of the way they've changed the catch rule, which I think is a positive thing, the way they've changed the catch rule. But one of the impacts is that we're going to see more receiver fumbles, because stuff that gets ruled incomplete is they're now fumbles if a receiver takes a third step. That's something also to watch out for. So a receiver with bad hands bad hands in terms of catching the ball, might end up with a couple of fumbles, even though they're not bad ball carriers. So that's just an aside. That has nothing to do with Thielen. But yeah, I'll kind of keep an eye on it and maybe check out, the other data pertaining to Thielen fumbles and maybe kind of watch some of those. If he's losing fumbles at a higher rate, which the questioner said like 4 out of 6. I mean, that's interesting and a problem, but like not a problem that's like you don't blame Thielen. It's just like, bad luck.
So Thielen found himself a bit in the Diggs role, who was previously in the Patterson role, who was previously in the Harvin role, and we were seeing some interesting plays from we were seeing jet sweeps from, of all people, Adam Thielen.
Yeah, we saw some jet sweeps from him. His 25-yard run, I think it was 25 yards, was the second longest run he had. His longest was a 41-yard run that he had as a personal punt protector back in 2015, back when he played special teams. And yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because they did use Diggs as a more traditional receiver in this game. And I thought for the most part, he pretty much excelled in that role. I thought Diggs played really, really well, aside from obviously the one play. And I think this is maybe the first game where you could say Diggs might have played better than Thielen. But, for the most part, that's not fair either because, like you said, Thielen got put into situations where, it's not the best for him, right? Because he got put into, a role where he's running kind of shorter routes. He also ran, I think, a couple of screens. But yeah, it worked out in terms of kind of the offensive output. Even though the jet sweep, I think, got counted as a rush, he still ended up with 110 yards, so he gets to continue the streak and all that. But yeah, it was an interesting wrinkle. I wouldn't make too much of it. I am encouraged to see Diggs running like receiver routes. That's nice because he's a good receiver.
It is nice when receivers do receiver things like that. Just be nicer if they continued on their route sometimes. But hey, that's just me.
Yeah. Speaking of, we saw Cordero Patterson take 10 carries from the running back position, and that caused some takes to fly on Twitter. Unrelated.
I had read something on Twitter along the lines of about HaHa Clinton Dix. I was like, HaHa Clinton Dix is not viewed is viewed differently nationally than he is regionally, and that's very much the situation with Cordero Patterson. Like, he is not viewed the same as if you had to watch him play for you for 2 years.
Yeah. There's obviously a great argument for having retained him, but I think everyone understood like why he had to go. And nationally, I think a lot of people were like, why would you let this electric player go? You just couldn't make it work. And it's like, I mean, I'm not going to stick up for the competence of, that series of offensive coordinators, but like, no, that's no.
Not a thing. Let's talk defense. Before we talk about Dan Barely, let's talk defense. And the defense really did a heck of a job to stifle the passing ability of Drew Brees. And Drew Brees got his first pick of the year, and it looked like he was going to cry.
Yeah. That was an interesting pick because it was, I mean, obviously it's a pick, so it's uncharacteristic, right? Because it was his first pick of the year. But also it was just like weird, right? So he gets pressured by Stephen Weatherly, who himself... it felt like he acted kind of weird because it looked like he'd pulled up and then went back in, like he thought Brees was going to get rid of the ball and he didn't want to get penalized or something. But he was unblocked on the play, which I guess if you're unblocked, you also should just be kind of alert to like, are they tricking me? What's going on? But that was interesting. And then Brees himself, he changed his throwing motion to accommodate the pressure, which he normally does. That's like a normal thing that really good quarterbacks do. But it just sailed. It was a throw to Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas was 10 yards down the field. The throw traveled 15 yards into the, I shouldn't say waiting hands of Harrison Smith because he did have to run to the ball. But, Harrison Smith was basically the intended receiver. So good job, Harry.
It is nice when that happens.
Yeah. Good job, Harry. Great return. Great interception. First interception of the year for Drew Brees. Another indication that the Vikings probably have a better defense than 30 points allowed would imply, because so many of those came off of like turnovers and bad field position.
So the run game, well, people thought the pass game was going to gash us, but the run game seemed to be doing more damage than anything else.
A little bit. Mostly actually Mark Ingram. Alvin Kamara was held to 3.8 yards a carry. And he also was kind of limited as a receiver to the extent that you can like limit Alvin Kamara as a receiver. Like Michael Thomas was like limited to 89 yards, like, right? Like it's all relative. Mark Ingram averaged, I think, above 5 yards a carry. Taysom Hill averaged negative 0.7, but mostly because of a Danielle Hunter not sack. A tackle for loss that was not counted as a sack. But yeah, I think when Ingram was on the field, they just they wanted to invite the run, I think, a little bit more. They didn't change kind of the way that they played their formations or anything like that, because they still consistently had like two safeties in the box and stuff like that in response to defensive personnel. But I think that they were much more likely to worry about things like play action and stuff like that. So the run game did like damage, and obviously they got a couple of touchdowns in the running game, and that that kind of sucks. But I think for the most part, they actually did a pretty good job containing the running game. I mean, they had three primary like offensive problems coming in, right? They had Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, and Alvin Kamara. And they did a really good job limiting all three of those guys. And so Mark Ingram going off for a couple of extra yards, yeah, I'm not too concerned about it.
No, and Michael Thomas specifically, he had a couple of little shining moments, but for the most part, he seemed to be shut down.
He seemed to be. I was actually surprised to find out after the game, looking up his statistics, that he caught 6 of 7 for 89 yards. And I was like, oh, that's a really quiet 80-plus yard game.
Yeah,
I'm kind of surprised.
And that's the thing, is like he seemed to be is one of those, like, he quietly had a respectable game.
Yeah. The first one was barely a catch. That was the very first throwing, or the second. Yeah, it was the second throwing drop back from the Saints that game. It was a 20-yarder to Trey Waynes. And I thought it was incomplete at first. The Vikings, they obviously challenged it. They thought it was incomplete, but it was ruled a catch. And so that was the biggest impact he had. And this is really interesting. You could take a look at Next Gen's passing chart, which I kind of disagree with kind of one of the things that they did on the passing chart, but it tells the same story kind of regardless. The Saints only had one attempt of 20 yards, and they had no attempts over 20 yards in the game, or besides Taysom Hill. So I say Drew Brees only had one attempt of a pass thrown 20 yards in the air. The next longest attempt was an interception. It was to Michael Thomas, who, again, he was 10 yards off the ball. The ball traveled 15 yards. Next Gen counts that as a 15-yard, target. And so that I think was his second longest target of the game. And so for Michael Thomas to have accrued 89 yards, in theory, a lot of it just comes on this underneath stuff where we're not really paying attention to kind of which receiver grabbed, an 8-yard catch, right? Like, oh, is it Michael Thomas, or is it like Dan Arnold, who is a player for the Saints? It kind of didn't matter. And so that's maybe why it felt like Michael Thomas had a quiet game, because one great catch and then like a bunch of underneath stuff that didn't go for very far. And that's why Brees ended up with a pretty respectable completion rate. He only had like 5 incompletions, but he only had 5.4 yards per attempt. It's because the Vikings forced them to pass short, which good on them. And I think that's why Michael Thomas didn't feel like he had much of an impact in the game.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Thomas is no Adam Thielen, clearly. I mean, the Thielen catch where the ball was behind the guy's head.
That was incredible. And what's crazy is that, like, PJ Williams had like 2 or 3 really good moments, and that should have been one of them, right? Because he was in great coverage. He handled Thielen coming out of the break really well, actually. Like, he moved really well in response to Thielen's route, which you don't see all the time because Thielen's such a great route runner. And he was like in position, and Thielen just like plucked it. Like, sorry, there's nothing you can do, man. When Godzilla stomps on you, you're dead. That's it. Like, there's no what if.
That is just kind of how that happens. Well, Everson Griffin returned to the lineup. How did he fare in his first game back?
He didn't have as big of an impact as I would have liked. It would have been really cool to see him get a sack. But he didn't generate a ton of pressure or anything like that. But he also, he wasn't a liability, and also the Vikings just had difficulty generating pressure in that game. I think Brees was under pressure on 24 dropbacks. I think on pressure like on 5 plays. So Griffin obviously is part of that. So he didn't get super involved in the running game. He didn't get super involved as a pass rusher, and it feels like it's going to take a week, and so I'm sure he'll be fine next week. But he returned, and that's really great. I think that's like kind of the important part. Even Danielle Hunter didn't. He did a much better job against the run, but no one generated that much pressure in the game, and that includes Everson, and includes Danielle, and that includes Stephen Weatherly.
Linval, however, seemed to stand out a little bit.
Yeah, he was great. He's part of the reason that the running game didn't do a ton against the Vikings, and then also he just kind of showed up on screen passes. He's just like, I'm here now. 4-yard loss. The time he fell on Elvin Kamara early in the game, that was pretty cool. He did a really good job reading the play and getting to the spot in situations where it's exactly that, right? Where it's talking about how Stephen Weatherly might have responded to just being unblocked. Linval was like, I'm unblocked. That's very unusual. There's something. Oh, it's a screen pass. Well, I'm just going to go here. No, he had a great game. And I think he probably had the best game out of all the defensive linemen for sure.
Yeah, Linval was quite hungry there. Side note: while you were at the presser and I was waiting outside, the wonderfully windy stadium in New Jersey, Linval Joseph was going up to family members who were taking pictures and going back to not a backstage area, but had a bunch of family from New York come in, and I hadn't actually seen him in person that close before. Linval probably could eat me. I was.
You're not a small person.
I
either.
am not a small human being, as you are well aware from the last 2 weeks. But yeah, I stood next to Linval Joseph and just went, "Damn." Hi.
Yeah, we were quite the pair in New York, by the way. 5'4", 6 foot, whatever you are.
Just under 6 or 6'5", or between 6'7" and 6'4", depending on which liquor store I'm leaving. But I usually say 6'5".
Yeah, right. We're just walking around together. But yeah, Linval kind of dwarfs humans.
It was fun. I hadn't had that reaction to a tall player or a big player since Bryant McKinney. Or he just looked up and went, dude.
Okay.
Well, that's the thing, is that people who are that tall get the same thing said to them all the time. Dude, you're so tall.
You're tall, yeah. It's such a great conversation starter, I found.
And especially you more get that from guys who are used to looking down on everyone at 6'4", 6'5", or whatever. But the moment that another man walks into the room and you're already this tall and you have to look up at them, there is no reaction. This is not a learned behavior. It's just dude. That's wow, I can see the part in your beard right there. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to share. Linval really is a massive human being in person, both physically and everything else. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because that was so damn entertaining. So Dan Barely. Living up to the nickname that I don't know if anyone else is calling him that, but we sure are. That was a wonderful missed extra point, which, according to the announcers, we haven't really missed many extra points this year. It's mainly just been field goals.
That's great. It's just
hard-hitting kicking analysis. Let's do this.
Yeah, I mean that feels like a small consolation. Yeah, mostly you've just missed a butt ton of field goals, but the extra points. Okay, great.
Yeah. Now it's seeping into extra points. Now there's a real problem.
Yeah, right. It's that's 3 points, man. That's way worse.
Yeah, the people who think it's a real
3 points
problem.
In field position.
Yeah, the people who think it's a real problem have him listed as their kicker in the North Code Fantasy League, which I hate everything. I may be winning now, but back in first place in the regular, in the number 1 league. But
the regular league.
I say the regular league. So we should have a relegation next year. But it's there was either this week or last week there were 7 mixed extra points, And so just watching the negative points in that league were just ridiculous. But anyway, so now it's seeping into extra points, huh?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, he seemed pretty surprised. Not like Justin Tucker's level of surprise. I mean, Justin Tucker had his own like existential crisis when he missed. But actually, that might be what caused all the missed extra points this week. Is Justin Tucker being off? All the other kickers like felt a ripple in the force.
Exactly. There is this theory that the death of David Bowie is the reason why everything like in 2016 went to hell. So like, or the theory that when Hefner died, that's when Me Too happened. That's when it was okay for like all the secrets to just explode out and all of these people to be like brought down. So it's entirely in the same vein as both of these conspiracy theories. Justin Tucker's kick that went awry caused everyone to just move 5 degrees to the left and start missing.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that sucks. It impacted the Vikings' ability to get back into the game, but not as much as like say a 5-minute drive with 9 minutes left, but. It changed kind of the calculus of what the Vikings needed to do because it was definitively a 3-score game, whereas a 16-point deficit, it's in theory a 2-score game because you can get the 2 extra point conversions or the point after attempt conversions for 2 points. But yeah, that sucked. Not really a defining moment of the game, and we're just kind of like a curse on the franchise. I mean, Dan Bailey's like the most accurate kicker in history or whatever, like second most accurate. And it's just like, yep. Yeah. Even here, even him, it just doesn't work.
Nothing.
We've had some pretty great kickers. Gary Anderson, Ryan Longwell, they miss. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it was more like a welcome to the club sort of situation at that point.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we should discuss about the loss to the Saints? I guess now that I'm thinking about it, the one thing I want to mention is after the fumble and the subsequent touchdown against the Vikings went out with 30 seconds left on the clock and effectively took a knee and just did a quick run and like left, knowing that they had the ball coming in the at the beginning of the second half. What is the I want to say like what's the logic behind it, but obviously the logic is, well, we're going to have the ball at the beginning of the second half, but is there any reason to attempt to get some form of points there?
So he was asked about this, not by me. I just want to be clear. He was asked about this specific instance after the presser, or after the game in the presser. And he said that the turnover influenced his decision to not do anything in that 30 seconds. And I think that that's backwards thinking, but I get it, right? Because if you exit the half with like 2 turnovers and you're somebody that like very powerfully believes in like the emotional impact that the events in the game can have on future events in the rest of the game, you don't want to have like a second turnover happen in like 3 minutes. And that can be like pretty deflating, and you can just kind of refresh everything and reset everything when you have possession. But I think it's backwards, because I think you can overcome the turnover and come into the half with something positive to take with you. And then also the reason that so many teams have started deferring when they win the coin toss is because it gives you double possessions, right? It's like it's an advantage, right? Because you always have a possession to respond, except when you've got 2 possessions in a row. I don't actually think that logic is all that sound, but I understand it, and it makes sense to have 2 possessions in a row. It's the whole reason you defer. And if you choose not to use one of those possessions when you have that opportunity, you've kind of sacrificed the point of deferring. So yeah, the 30 seconds with 2 timeouts left. I mean, yeah, it felt like they had an opportunity to at least put 3 on the board, and they chose not to. And I think that was an incorrect decision, but it was a conscious decision, and one that the Vikings understood. Kind of, it wasn't like I didn't realize. It was the one where they kind of understood what they wanted to do, and they knew what they were capable of doing, and then chose to do something that just kind of ended the half and got them out of I don't know, their funk, I guess. So I mean, that was the logic behind it. I think that it's better to try and score. If you're telling the team beforehand, before the game, I promise you that we're going to be aggressive, and you fulfill that promise by going for it on fourth down 3 times. So I get it. Which 2 of those times it worked out like really well. But like, then you choose not to be aggressive in a situation where it's almost costless to be aggressive, right? Because if you throw like a deep interception and I don't think they had any timeouts left, and they have the ball with like 4 seconds left, like who cares, right? But you've got an option to score a touchdown or even just a field goal, and they declined it. So I thought that was poor. And I think overall, the ability of the offense to score in a limited amount of time has been an issue. It was an issue in this game, obviously, in a huge way, and it's been an issue all season. Except against Green Bay. They did really well there.
Is there anything else that we should cover on the game before we move on?
Unless we're going to talk about the Zimmer blowing up at me.
Well, I mean, I figure that we could put this on some form of a business card for you. I mean, we discussed that.
We even mocked up the business card.
It was great. It was like, well, if we're going to post this on Twitter, you should probably not have your phone number. Like, oh, great idea. Okay, hold on.
I'm gonna hold off on it. I don't want to like make too big a deal of it, right? But maybe at the end of the season, I'm gonna include all the quotes of the people who hate me as like endorsements on a business card.
I was thinking it should just be like the dust cover quote on the back part of the training camp guide, where it's like a work in progress.
So instead of like the Kirkus reviews and New York Times review of books, it's like
absolutely wrong. Be fantastic. Well, that is going to be it for this part of the show. There is a lot of news, however, to discuss on the trade block, because as the trade window is closing, a lot of movement happened in the NFC North, and probably the best team in the league may have gotten a little bit better. So the first trade I want to mention is HaHa Clinton Dix, who's now a Washington Redskin. And he was a capable safety. Being capable in the backfield of Green Bay is kind of a dirty word. It's not something that is seen very often. So, and the fact that they traded away another corner earlier this year, it seems to me that if your defense is a liability, you don't trade away a working part of your defense.
Yeah, I'm not sure, like, because like the thing is, he was a defensive snap leader, so they put him on the field as a starter. Like he, I think maybe led the team or was among like the top 3 in the team in terms of defensive snaps. Like they were very clearly saying that this is our best available option at one of the 2 safety spots. And so if he had been losing snaps over time, you could understand it, right? Like. A good example, I think, would be Andrew Sandeo, who I don't think should be traded necessarily unless, there's a good conversation about compensation. But if the Vikings traded him, I think we would all understand it, right? We would get like, oh, well, Sandeo's not been on the field a ton, and, we've been putting together a bunch of 3 safety looks. We've seen what Harris can do and Aloka can do and Kurse can do in their respective roles. And, maybe they're not upgrades. Maybe they are upgrades. But, the compensation that we get back is going to be kind of more than make up for it, right? That's not really the case with HaHa Clinton Dix, where they just didn't have somebody that they would rather play in front of him. So I'm not really sure and it's not like they were hamstrung by his contract, right? I mean, it's a rookie contract. So, yeah, I don't really know, because you would expect the Packers to be kind of in this win now mode. And, the other trade they made, the Ty Montgomery one, that one makes sense. Everyone was just like pissed at him and he wasn't all that good anyway.
Yeah, Ty Montgomery was traded for a package of peanuts on Delta Airlines. Like there was nothing of value they were wanting to get out of that. They just needed somebody who was going to be going rogue on a kick return to really just take a long walk off a short pier.
Right, yeah.
The next thing I want to mention is Golden Tate, not even arguably the best wide receiver Detroit has had since Megatron, the most productive member of that offense, if we're being honest. That's not Matt Stafford, has been traded again for peanuts over to the Eagles.
Yeah, so this says a couple of things. I think one, it says that the Cowboys were insane to trade a first-round pick for Amari Cooper.
We knew that before, but this
Right.
really did solidify that information.
Yeah. Two, so Detroit has a lot of good receivers, right? So this is a situation where you could say that Kenny Golladay looks really good, and Marvin Jones has been super productive. But, you know, it's not the same, right? Because you tend to just have two safeties, right? You don't like rotate them unless you're the Vikings. You don't tend to have like your nickel safety package and your base safety package, and you don't usually get to choose how many safeties you want to put on the field. But you could like have three wide receivers on the field at the same time. Like you could just do that and be fine. Like that's kind of the thing that most teams are doing most of the time now. So having three receivers that you like is good. And in addition to that, the Lions don't have tight ends. And so I am confused. Like, I guess that means that the second takeaway is that the Lions don't think they can compete this year. But if that's the case, I don't know why you wouldn't also try and trade Marvin Jones. And in fact, would rather trade Marvin Jones than Golden Tate because I think Jones is older than Golden Tate. And if not, then, you know, I still don't think that he's like kind of an essential building block for the future. And I think he's a great receiver too. So like, I don't really get it. But then also the thing that's the most confusing, the most baffling, I think, is that they traded for Damon Harrison, like a couple days ago. And so to get rid of assets, after you've acquired win now-ish assets, it's kind of confusing. I think the Bears did something kind of similar a couple of years ago, but like, I don't get what direction they think they're going in, or maybe they just didn't want to go like, because, you know, there's always this persistent rumor that he's like not a good locker room guy. You know, maybe that's it.
Lions Twitter and a couple of friends of mine that are Lions fans blew up today over this. My favorite line from this entire rant was something along the lines of, "It's like they don't understand what makes it possible for Golladay and Jones to be open 40 yards downfield."
That's a pretty good point. Marvin Jones is like a persistent deep threat, and he's not fast. And so helping him do those things, I feel like you just want to do that, right? Like, he runs like a 4.58 or something like that. And if he didn't at the combine, he does now, right? He's always open deep, but I think it's because he's had a lot of like he used to play opposite AJ Green. Now he plays opposite Golladay and Tate, or he did. And I think that it probably contributed a lot to him being kind of open deep. It's weird.
Yeah, the idea that this is just going to happen naturally, like the morning dew, without Golden Tate is frankly ridiculous. The last thing to mention, the Rams traded for Dante Fowler, and I'm still trying to figure out how the hell they have any like cap space or money or like anything that they could use to pay any new players.
They did try to trade for Khalil Mack. They clearly have like some cap space, like just stuffed in a mattress somewhere.
We don't like our cap space in banks. We like it in mattresses.
Yeah, I mean, you know, banks can fail.
Your mattress, however, that's going to be around forever.
But yeah, that would make sense to me. They have like 2 sacks from edge rushers, and they've had to play Ndamukong Suh and Michael Brockers, a nose tackle, mind you, Michael Brockers, at the edge this year. They just don't have edge rushers, so that would make sense. I mean, Dante Fowler is not like good, but you know, he's better than like Matt Longacre. So that would make sense. The rich get richer, I guess. I don't know. The Rams are definitely the class of the NFC. So cool.
Well, at least it's not the Eagles this year.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're both happy for that.
Pretty happy about that. But yeah, I mean, the Eagles getting Golden Tate, that sucks because I mean the Vikings are going to be in competition with them if they don't win the division, for a wild card seeding spot. And if one of those two teams does win the division, they'll probably meet later in the playoffs in Golden Tate. I'm glad that the Vikings don't have to play against him, 2 times a year for the next couple of years. And so it's net better, right? Especially like right before a Lions game. But it's still you might have to meet the 2 Vikings killers, Alshon Jeffrey, TM, Golden Tate in the playoffs. And again, I think that the Golden Tate doing better against the Vikings is overinflated, but at least legitimate. I think Alshon Jeffrey doing better against the Vikings is just like, yeah, he played friggin' Josh Robinson and Chris Cook.
Yeah.
But like Golden Tate, like beating up on Xavier Rhodes happened twice and it became kind of a meme, but at least he beat up on Xavier Rhodes. So fair. But yeah, it's going to suck, meeting them in the playoffs and having the 2 Vikings killers. It's like, you assembled a team to beat the team that you beat. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's like, well, we won the Super Bowl, but we really need to make sure we're ready to face the Vikings again next year.
Right, which 0 for 1. But, it's the playoffs that count, so fair enough.
Yeah. Let's go to the mailbag. And Brian Jellerson has our first question. He says, any chance Cook's absence could be more psychological than physical? I've seen players struggle to return from serious injury in the past because they fear a reoccurrence.
I think it's not likely to be psychological in the sense that he's, consciously or unconsciously inhibiting himself from returning, right? Because, if it's unconscious, you can't even like blame a person, right? It's just kind of is something that they can't control and it's kind of lurking. But I don't think that's the case because, his play on the field kind of demonstrates that he's kind of willing to take on contact and be aggressive with hits and stuff like that. I think it can be related to the psychology of an injury, though. So indirectly, I think that the way that you compensate for having an ACL injury very often, this happened to what's his name on the Vikings, Cedric Griffin, right? Like all the way back when he had like 3 ACL tears, didn't he?
I believe that was Cedric Griffin.
Yeah, he overcompensated. So like he had an injury in one knee, and so he tended to make his primary movements come off of his other knee, and that put too much force on that knee, and that forced another ACL. And it doesn't always mean like one ACL leads to another ACL, but like injuries in one leg can force you to compensate and change your mechanics and movement in the other leg, and that might counterintuitively, but like also create different movements in the original leg, and that might have contributed to his hamstring injury. So I think maybe there's a psychology of injury kind of involved that's difficult to control, but I don't think it's because he's like, unconsciously or consciously hesitant to return to the field.
Yeah, it was in fact Cedric Griffin. So just wanted to clarify that because I'm apparently stat boy today.
Yay, thanks.
Next question is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, would you rather Mike Zimmer tell you you're wrong about football or Elton Braun tell you this tastes awful to one of your cooked meals?
Absolutely Mike Zimmer. Unless... Right. Well, okay, so one... Mike Zimmer is like shielding himself from criticism, right? Alton Brown telling me like my food tastes bad. He's not shielding himself. He's just the unvarnished truth. Like, wow, you're bad at cooking. Like that sucks, right? 2, so one, I think the motivations would be different. If I was like criticizing Alton Brown's cooking, which, oh my God, why would I ever do that? I mean, I've done that, but not to his face. But, that would make a little bit more sense, too. Football is something that, it's my job to know. It's definitely part of my identity. I pride myself on having football knowledge. And so being told I'm kind of wrong about football sucks. But at least in the context that Mike Zimmer said I was wrong was not like, you don't know anything about X's and O's in football. It's just I disagree with your assessment of clock management, which I'm going to talk about more in a second, actually. But food is like something I create. I do it as a hobby. I'm very proud of it, right? That I feel like I'm good at cooking and I feel like I'm good at dealing with food. And so Alton Brown telling me that like the passion that like you pursue in your free time is pointless. You suck. Like that sucks way more. But yeah, so there might be people who are not like aware of this. So after the game, I asked Mike Zimmer, hey, so it seems like the Vikings in hurry-up situations seem to have clock management issues. What do you think accounts for that? And when I said clock management issues, his like eyes went wide and he looked like right at me, like he was surprised to hear this.
The Kill Bill like starts in his head.
And then he goes, "What? Because I didn't go for some extra points with 30 seconds left." And that didn't even cross my mind. I was like, no, I'm talking about, and I wanted to be clear. So I did make some mistakes. I'll say that in a second. But I was talking about, you got the ball with 9:35 left, and you had a 5 minute and 6 or 7. So you had a 5 minute drive, down 3 scores, and so they get the ball back with 4 minutes. That seems like a clock management issue. And so that's what I was referring to. And that's what I told him, right? He was like, well, because I didn't, try to score with 30 seconds left. And I was like, no, I mean, in the fourth quarter, there's a drive that took way too much time. And kind of, I didn't see me because I only have like a couple of seconds to talk to him in the presser environment. I didn't say, and then also they like huddled for 30 seconds to do like a quarterback sneak, right? But yeah, I mean, that's like a problem, right? And so that's what I said. And he goes, no, I think you're absolutely wrong about the clock management issues. I don't think that we work on this all the time. I work on it every day. I think you're absolutely wrong about clock management. Or no, he finished with, I think you're absolutely wrong. So you get the quote, you're absolutely wrong. And also the quote, you're absolutely wrong about clock management, because he said both things. But yeah, and I was like, okay. And I feel like I shouldn't have said okay that quickly, because I felt like I was just like, I don't want to deal with the smoke. But really, I was just like, well, I'm not going to get an answer out of you. Let's move on. But I was like, okay, fine. Yeah,
it's a situation that you watch other reporters like try for that third question on Bill Belichick, and right. They haven't watched every presser he's ever done. Like, you get one shot at that, and if you're not going to get the reaction that you want out of the first one, you're sure as hell not getting it out of the second or the third. Like,
yeah, I'm definitely not a third questioner. I will do the second question if you can be more specific, and if you think that you can reword the question in a way that'll get, because I've had that work. It worked like last week with Cousins when I was asking about batted balls, but I'm definitely not a third questioner. Like, if you screw up the second question, like, well, that's move on, find a new slant. Yeah, I'm definitely not a third questioner. But yeah, I mean, second questions, you got to pick and choose. And I think with Bill Belichick, I think that's a really good example where you just have to be like, well, yeah, I'm not getting what I want today. I have to write something else.
Yeah. Well, that takes care of that question. So the next question I have is from Connor, who asks, following the trade of Golden Tate to the Eagles to join Alshon Jeffrey, who is the biggest Vikings killer in franchise history? Other than the Vikings themselves.
Right. Excluding the Vikings.
Boy, I'm thinking of his name, the best kick returner ever in the game.
Oh, Devin Hester.
Devin Hester.
And no, you should not say that. He's the best punt returner.
Oh, my bad.
It's really important because the best kick returner is now Cordero Patterson.
Oh, really? Is that how that works? Okay.
Yeah, well, so he's actually. So I've had this argument a lot on Twitter, which surprise.
This is my this really is my surprised face.
Yeah, right. Devin Hester was like an average, above average kick returner, and he's a GOAT punt returner. And so I think it's incorrect. It's it's fine to say returner, but it's incorrect to say he's one of the top kick returners in history. He did return, I think, a kick or two for a touchdown against the Vikings because Vikings.
Yes.
But like his primary highlights are as punt returners, and that allows us to open up the conversation about Cordero Patterson because he's only a kick returner. He doesn't return punts. And every time someone mentions, hey, Patterson really has an opportunity to be the best kick returner in history, a bunch of people will say, but what about Devin Hester, man? Weren't you alive like 10 years ago? Like, it wasn't that long ago. And it's like, you get to respond with, didn't you pay attention to this guy that you're caping for? He's a punt returner. So, I mean, it's always fun to have those arguments. But yeah, I mean, Patterson got another touchdown 2 weeks ago as a kicker. Well, I mean, he also cost another touchdown, so who knows? But yeah, I mean, I always want to be really clear. Hester's a punt returner who returned kicks. But yeah, Devin Hester, I think he is because out of his like 9 punt return touchdowns, like 5 of them or something were against the Vikings.
A ridiculous amount, yes.
Yeah, it was like, Christ. Like, even if you account for the fact that the Vikings played them twice a year, it doesn't make sense.
No, it still feels like God hated us every time that, and the whole idea of kicking away from him, like, no, we're going to be brave. Our team will kick toward Devin Hester. Yeah. How well did that turn out for you?
Right. I think there were 1 or 2 instances where they kicked away from him and that also didn't work. And it was just like, oh, well, screw us, I guess.
Yeah, one of them was like this really amazing fake return where it goes in one direction and then where the ball goes in one direction, but they act like it came from another. And Hester just burned up the field and everyone like tackled him. Meanwhile, the guy went untouched.
It was just like, good, of course. The one time that the punter kicks away from, there's another guy. Like, good Lord. You kidding me?
Yeah. Kenneth Allen asks, how do you feel about Kendricks' play in the last couple of weeks? Arif pointed out in the last few weeks how relatively poor he was playing, but I don't think you've talked about him much since. Has he improved as the defense as a whole, or is he much the same?
He was pretty good against the Saints, but he was pretty bad against the Jets. So I don't like. I would say he has not demonstrated that he's bounced back because the Jets game, I think, was I mean, it wasn't one of his worst games or anything like that, but it was a good example of like the issues that he had. And the Saints game, he seemed pretty good. So I don't know. Right now, I would say he's a liability until he proves otherwise. And liability always seems like a really harsh word. But it's not like you can replace him because, I mean, already there's injury problems and I doubt, as good as Eric Wilson is, that even if Anthony Barr were back, that Eric Wilson would play better than Kendrick. So, I mean, let him work it out. He'll be good again. He's been good for most of his career.
Next question is also from Kenneth Allen, who asks, have you guys noticed how often they are calling these double kickoff blocks now? I know you guys talked about them in an episode recently, but I think I've seen one at least every Sunday in one game or another.
Yeah, I mean, what's a new rule instituted this year? So there was a wedge block rule instituted a couple years ago, and this is not that. This is double teams almost. So the wedge block, you stayed in contact with your essentially partner as a blocker, and then you would take people on, whereas these are just double teams. You just cannot double team people. And there's like exceptions, like if the double team kind of occurs incidentally and stuff like that. But it's really difficult because you have to imagine, like, some of these special teamers have been special teamers for years, and so they have to kind of fight their instincts to create the best lanes, which you can do best by, double teaming and then moving up. And then B, some of these players, when they play from scrimmage, will also like double team because there's a lot of tight ends, right, in special teams. And so a lot of these special teamers will also just be very used to double teaming from scrimmage. So yeah, we're seeing it a lot, but it is like a completely new rule. This is not the old wedge rule from a while back, which is related, but it's not the same. This is a new rule for this year.
Also from Kenneth Allen, instead of a Patreon, hey, I did it without messing up there. Instead of a Patreon exclusive Christmas episode, can we get a Thanksgiving episode where you guys just talk about how much turkey sucks and what better options there are for Thanksgiving food? I feel like if you want that, you can just listen to the Thanksgiving episode. Yeah,
we do this a lot just for the Thanksgiving episode anyway.
The Thanksgiving episode is basically like half food anyway. So yeah.
Stay tuned. It's like 3 weeks away, man.
Oh, God, why? Sorry, time means like I really did go into full like Rocky Horror time warp thing there. Like time means nothing. I know it's Tuesday when we're recording this. I have no idea what day anything actually like is. Paul asks, are we going 8-7-1 or 7-8-1?
I feel like 7-8-1 feels the most Vikings-ish. No, I mean the Vikings played well in this game, so they've got a bunch of divisional games coming up. I think they're all winnable. I think that the Bears are. I was going to say paper tigers. That seems they're paper bears. I think that their offensive stats are fake. I think that their defensive stats have shown significant signs of regression. So I think the Bears are very winnable in both away and at home. They're going up against the Lions, who have now lost their Vikings Killer. They've got one more game against the Packers coming up, and I think they've got a slate of divisional games coming up very soon. So they'll be fine. I shouldn't say that. I think they'll probably be fine. How about that? But I mean, if I was going to pick a more Vikings, it would be 7-8-1. But if I think, but if I'm going to like project the rest of the season, I think they're going to win more games than they lose.
All right. Next question is from Raul, who asks, Everson Griffin spoke to the media earlier this week, press conference style. I'm sure that was uncomfortable for him. One that I assume he and the Vikings would like to avoid. Is this conference something that the press requests or something he is obligated to do by contract?
Neither. He chose to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the press probably did want to talk to him, right? And they might have requested it or whatever. But he can turn them down. Players turn down reporters all the time in the locker room, like all the time. And so, I mean, Harrison Smith, for example, will speak very occasionally. Sendejo will speak even less, and they'll only kind of speak to the media a couple of times a year to fulfill their contractual obligations. So, and the contractual obligations thing only comes up if a media member files something, I think, with the PFWA. For a player kind of refusing to meet their contractual obligations. And so if Everson had said no, I doubt anybody, I know there's a couple of personalities that everyone in the Twin Cities media, those guys are assholes or whatever. A lot of those guys that people don't like in the Twin Cities media for being assholes are not in the locker rooms. They're not in a position to request, which this is not like a locker room flex thing. It's just they wouldn't request it, right? It's not their job to do the player interviews. But second, I don't think anyone's so much of an asshole, and I don't think anyone really is, but I don't think anyone particularly is so much of an asshole that they would say, yeah, Everson Griffin didn't talk to me after he came back from a mental health struggle where he was gone from the team for 5 weeks. I'm going to file a report. It wouldn't happen. Someone has to file a report. So no, Everson essentially chose to do it. And from my understanding, it was unprompted. So it was probably uncomfortable, but that might have been the point. I think Everson might have wanted to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Don from Ohio wraps up the mailbag with James and Arif are running. Wait, that's not right. James and Arif are no, that's not right either. James and Arif are power walking. No, James and Arif are walking at a very slow pace, and I'm not that slow a walker. I have these long dancer's legs. I can keep up with the tiny people and the people giving ASL preaching outside of delis at 3 a.m. I can.
Yeah, I'm a pretty fast walker too, honestly. Yeah. I mean, I've been asked to slow down by a number of people. And then when Rashad and I hang out, my brother and I hang out, we blaze through. We just walk as fast as possible and people get left in the dust. I'm sorry, everyone.
That would actually make sense. James and Arif are walking at a very slow pace when they come across Kyle Slaby, who is stuck in quicksand. He offers both of you $1,000 in cash, which he has in hand, to help you out. Do you guys take the money or leave him to die?
Okay, so I think he asked, do you take the money and run, or do you take the money and help him?
Oh, yep, that is it. Okay, do you guys take the money and leave him to die?
Yeah, which I think was a particularly great twist because there was no option that he left us to just refuse the money, but then also leave him to die. It was well, we're taking the money either way. No, I would definitely. I mean, a person who has $1,000 in cash on hand probably has more money that they're willing to give you if you save their life. So from a purely rational perspective, where you don't care about human lives, but you care about money, you save them.
That is the kind of breakdown that you want on the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. If you take anything away from any of this, it's that if a person has $1,000 in cash on them, they probably have more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it just seems you're not walking around $1,000 in cash for no reason. You have it, right? Second, Kyle Slaby, very, very smart to point out he contributes to Norse code. So, yes. Third, he's a human, man. This is definitely third on the list, but he's a human, man. You gotta save him, man. Like, unless he's like a villain, which, Don, I wouldn't go out of your way to try and cast members of Vikings Twitter as villains. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah. I mean, the closest thing to Vikings Twitter like villain is Dusty, and I did slap him in an elevator. So I did, in fact, get the slap on behalf of Norse Code listeners. So all those that donated to the show with a note saying this is toward slapping Dusty, mission accomplished. Banner unfurled, landing the jet on the aircraft carrier. We did it, everyone. That is going to be it for this episode. We will be back later in the week to preview the Lions game, which is going to have a much different feel with Golden Tate no longer on the team. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Gonna have the Saints review up in the morning. Hopefully by the time this is posted, and then obviously gonna have a preview of the upcoming game, and then also I might have a Daniil Hunter story. So those are the things I'm plugging over at theathletic.com.
Right on. Well, that is going to be it for this episode. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember to tweet that, even if it is a work in progress. And we will talk to you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.